Gold.
Bitcoin.
Diamond.
Silver.
Platinum.
Copper.
These are the precious metals that make up our earth.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.
That's what our podcast is now. We're just
What?
naming things that we enjoy and invest in.
I know.
Idris Elba Gold documentary. You remember seeing ads for that
Excuse
everywhere?
me?
Were you guys
No.
not getting ads for that?
He did a gold documentary?
I think sponsored by Gold.
What do you mean sponsored by gold?
It was
The
like
commodity?
yes, by Gold. Well, I don't know, or whatever.
Big Gold.
It's human. Yeah, I think Big Gold. You poo-pooed me, but let me look Google right now. How is Gold doing?
I didn't poo-poo you. What are
Well,
you talking about?
AI overview. Gold is doing well.
Yeah, it's starting today.
Because gold, I've always said financial advice from this moment onward to the end of the podcast. I've always said put your money in money. But what's the first kind of money?
Many are tortured over this discussion, actually.
Like in cells?
No, I mean, when you talk about what is the first form of money.
It's gold.
Oh, my God. No.
It's, what is it? It's love. The fifth, it's love.
There you go.
The fifth element.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Liz.
My name is Brace Belden. I got nothing funny to say. That's it.
I'm producer Young Chomsky.
And this is TrueAnon.
Seems like you can't get away from stocks these days.
I was going to say, people have been asking for this episode for a while, and we're so excited to finally have it happen. I do think that we have like a surprising crossover with this podcast.
So for me, the only fans that I interact with are sometimes I'm walking down the street in Soho.
Big
and
jeans, tiny top.
I'm wearing massive jean shorts and
The tightest tank top you could imagine.
You've never seen my rolls spilling down like cascading waterfalls.
Addison Rae and the AirPods.
Addison Rae in the airport. Addison Rae in the arm. I got Addison on one side and Sabrina Carpenter on the other. Let me actually
Shout out, new record.
shout out actually the dream I think I told you guys about, but meant
You
to say in the
did.
podcast and forgot. So as listeners will know, I said
love
that
this dream.
Sabrina Carpenter was not attractive because she looks like a little person. Which, by the way, I did see the movie, and I shout out to all
What movie?
Tiptoes.
What?
Dude, check that out. Look up Tiptoes right now. Tiptoes, and who's the fucking short guy from Game of Thrones? Game of Thrones. Well, I can't remember his name. The short guy from Game of
Gary
Thrones.
Oldman.
Not Gary. No, Gary
No,
Oldman's
in
on his knees the
Tiptoes.
entire movie. So it's a movie about a dwarf family.
But Gary Oldman is
Peter
doing
Dinklage.
dwarf face.
Gary Oldman is doing dwarf face and dwarf leg. He's visibly on his knees in almost every scene.
Wait, but do they put like shoes on his
No.
knees?
Yes.
But he's so good he can do it.
No, he can't.
I imagine
really,
he
you
can.
have to see Tiptoes.
Okay.
He's like on his knees, but his arms are the same length, and he just looks like Gary Oldman, but he's on his knees.
More of a Lieutenant
It's about a
Dan
family
situation.
of dwarves where the only tall one is Matthew McConaughey, and he's
So
seen
not a dwarf.
not a dwarf, and he has seen a woman. He gets her pregnant.
Kate
and
Beckinsale?
He has yes.
Oh,
and
they
he-
got Dink in here too.
Look up Peter Dinklage Tiptoes because
Pretty
you're about to
stacked
see
cast in general.
it's a great movie. The craziest box braids of your fucking life.
The craziest what?
Box braids of your fucking life
On Dinklage.
on
No,
Dinklage.
I just see normal Dink. Oh, there they are.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, shit.
It's crazy.
Is that Patricia Arquette?
Yes. Yeah.
This is a crazy ass movie.
It's you see Peter Dinklage plays a French Canadian
well, that's crazy.
Marxist biker who is banging Patricia Arquette, who appears to just straight up be playing a tweaker. And they both have braids the entire time.
Man, you could put crazy ass shit out in 2004.
I saw it the other night. It was one of the craziest movies that my buddy was just like, let's watch Tiptoes. Never heard it before in my life. We watched it. It really blew my mind.
That's lovely.
Dinklage is incredible in it.
I told you this, but I watched that movie Materialists,
Oh God,
which
yeah.
is not great. But I was sick, and it was I was like, this is be good couch sick movie. I didn't know going into this, and I told you.
Spoiler alert.
Okay, but the major plot line is that Pedro Pascal has had the Chad leg lengthening surgery to the point that in this scene in the movie, Dakota Johnson is breaking up with him. And he's like, I just feel like this is about the legs.
That's so funny.
That's the fucking line. I lost
And it's not
it.
a comedy.
No, it's not a comedy at all. There's nothing funny. He's
funny.
playing this straight. And then literally, like, they decide to break up or whatever. And he's like, do you want to see? And she's like, okay. And then he crouches down. And you see him crouch down with his legs so he can show her what height he was at before he made the investment in the Chad surgery. And she's like, during it, she's like, I understand making the investment. I don't know. It's the whole thing. But I was just like, this is an insane plot point.
She should have been like, you look like fucking Gary Oldman in Tiptoes.
Yeah.
Because people get mad at me if I don't tell this dream. The first time it's ever happened.
Okay,
because
let's
I
go
tease the
back.
dream. I had a scary dream the other night because I felt bad because I said Sabrina Carpenter was so short. The night I watched Tiptoes, I had a dream that I was in underground passageways with some sort of like Hare Krishna group that was like radicalized and was going to do a terror bombing. And they bring me, I was like a member of the group, and they bring me to this like lair that they have, and they sit me at a table, and across from me is this like wizened sort of shriveled creature in a blue robe, and I look closely and I can see the deep line face, 2 feet tall, sort of draped in these robes. It is Sabrina Carpenter. And I say, oh my God, I didn't realize you were this short and fucked up looking. You look like the fucking guy that lives in the other guy's stomach in Total Recall.
Watto.
Yeah,
Quato.
we're always talking about him.
You look like that guy.
Big Quato podcast.
And I was like, oh my
kind of
God.
is.
I'm like, and then I was also in the gym like, well, it would have been more fucked up if I did think you were hot because you're fucking 2 feet tall and you look like Quato. And I was like, I felt like genuine sorrow and
guilt.
And guilt.
I feel like that's the big one.
I know. And
Interesting.
I had to tell that dream to my analyst yesterday, and she had a tough time taking me seriously, which I think
Taking
she
you
is.
serious, she couldn't break it down.
I was just like,
I feel like
I don't know what
your
to tell you. I didn't mean to
task
dream it.
needs to be to create the most complicated, insane dreams to break your analyst.
Trazodone really helps with that. Trazodone really helps with that. But the thing is, the trick is to write them down. That can be tough sometimes.
Yeah.
We are talking about money.
We're always talking about that.
Dollars,
know what,
gold,
we're not.
silver.
We're talking about all sorts of things. It's so great to have Joe on the show. Look at that. That's a rhyme. Because we've been wanting to do this for so long. And I don't know, we kind of went all over the place. We're talking a lot about the Fed. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about, you know it, you love it. It's China.
And we didn't even get to Pulte.
We didn't get to Pulte.
Pulte?
We didn't talk about the dollar. I wanted to talk about the dollar, but that's all right.
That's okay.
We can do it next time. But first, let's listen to this conversation.
After enduring the terrors of the Holocaust, Simon Wiesenthal turned his life around and spent decades tracking down the people that committed that horrible atrocity. His adventures span the globe and the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, I believe. A lot of documents there. It is somewhere in Europe. I probably should have read more about that before I started this introduction. Fast forward some amount of decades later, we are here in Brooklyn, New York, risen from the ashes of World War II with Simon's great-great-grandson, Joe Wiesenthal, while his great-great-grandfather might have hunted down various perpetrators of one of the greatest industrial slaughters, in fact, the greatest industrial slaughter of all time. Joe spends his time as the co-host of the Odd Lots Hold on. Nope. Joe spends his time as the co-host of the Odd Lots podcast at Bloomberg. And instead of hunting down various perpetrators, he interviews them.
Oh, my God.
And hunts down deals. One of the biggest holders of Bitcoin, probably since Satoshi, which he is rumored to be. He has denied those rumors, saying that I am a white man. I would never name myself that. He is here with us today to say Wagwan economy. I'm so sorry. I couldn't finish that one. Hello, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me. The transcript of this episode will one day be fed into an AI, and somewhere in the future, it will then be established that I am the great. I am not.
It
and
works.
and not only but I am. And here is me trying to game the referee of the AI because I know. So I'm not only not. He spells his name W-I-E. I'm W-E-I. I love the intro,
Ellis
nonetheless. We have tried as a family to see if there's any connection. So far,
Really?
Yeah. Why
Sure.
not?
He's one of the goats.
As
Yeah.
far as I know, there may be some Weisenthals who had spelled it Wiesenthal. It's possible. But thank you for the flattering, inaccurate introduction. I love it.
I will say on that note, Grok does.
I'm not saying anything about the Satoshi claim, by the way.
No, we'll leave that
Yeah,
alone.
we're gonna leave that.
Grok does seem to report that I'm now 6'2".
Where did that come from?
I don't know, but I can dunk. If this is also for future AI
Yeah.
out there, I can dunk. I'm good at dunking, and I have dunked before, but won't again. I retired.
Congratulations.
Let's talk money.
Joe, we're so excited to do this.
I'm
It's
thrilled
been a
to be
long
here.
time coming.
It has been too long.
We have so much to talk about, I feel like, and it's such a great time to have you on the show for
Yes.
this. We're going to start just right at you were just at Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
Where is that?
Oh, it's great. So it's in Wyoming at the Grand Teton National Park.
Okay.
I think it is. They've been doing it about 40 years. It's technically, they call it Jackson Hole. The Kansas City Fed, one of the 12 Fed districts, they put on an annual research event. It's actually an academic economic conference, and they invite central bankers and academics, professors all around the world to come and deliver statements. They established it in Jackson Hole, I think, about 40-something years ago because then former Fed chair Paul Volcker was a fan of fly fishing, and they're like, well, let's do it in Wyoming so that we can get the chair to come out. And
You're already destroying any case for Fed independence.
no, this is, so let's just jump right into it. This is something that's on a lot of people's minds. I think you could never establish this today.
Right.
This is the key thing that you've already hit on, which is that Jackson Hole as we know it may continue yet for several more years, despite the growing criticism of the Federal Reserve independence that we all know about and that we'll get into further. But when you're there, you're like, well, this could never be established today, right? You could never announce this as a new thing in 2025 where we're going to have the head of the Bank of England, the head of the Bank of Japan, the head of the ECB, the head of the Fed, all these other people, and they gather in this very nice place. It's the end of August, the most beautiful, some of the most beautiful landscape in the world. Everyone knows it's sort of half work, half vacation. No one takes too seriously. It may exist further, but the political climate that allowed that to be created does not exist anymore.
Well, it ended up being some sort of Bitcoin Burning Man event is what it would be now.
Incidentally, it's funny you say that because incidentally, there is now a Bitcoin or crypto event that takes place in Jackson Hole the week before.
No way.
Yeah.
They're trying to kind of be a part of it. It's sort of like a South by Southwest thing.
I think Anthony Scaramucci is involved in it. No, this is for real. It's like a but it's the week before. It's not it's not the same lodge that the Kansas City Fed
They can't afford
won.
it.
But yes, this idea that the current incarnation would resemble something like that is actually not only astute. I think it's literally accurate.
So I was listening to your show, and you did a bunch of episodes from Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
And you continually described it as surreal.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that way? As opposed to other years, because you've been going for some time.
This is the third year I've gone. Like I said, it is this sort of academic thing where people present papers like measuring the output gap. How much more growth can we have before triggering runaway inflation? Or what does the post-COVID inflation tell us about, the difference in measuring whatever in Europe versus the U.S. or structure of the labor market, et cetera. And these are all important things, and I'm interested in these topics, but the discussion of all of them is to some extent a luxury of this phenomenon that there is this group that gets to meet and gets to make these decisions sort of independent of the direct electoral political process. And by and large, we know this is under threat. I mean, we know this is under threat. President Trump has talked about having a, quote, majority at the Fed, which means that to some extent the FOMC would not be this sort of ostensibly apolitical set of technocrats. He's talking about it in more explicitly partisan terms. And so the surrealness is that we know that the political environment that undergirds this is changing. Yet by and large, at the event itself, there was not a lot of acknowledgement of that fact. People going through the motions as if we still live in an age in which we can have these sort of technical discussions about how monetary policy interacts with the economy in this sort of glassed off world, and we know that world is changing.
It's funny because I think it's almost like there's a kind of phenomenon, I think, with democratic institutions where when you start, especially within them, start to acknowledge the threats, you start to even erode the belief in them further.
Yeah.
Or people maybe think that.
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of like idea of like everyone kind of talking around it as a way to escape or as a sort of ballast against, you know, all of that.
Well, that's another really important point that speaks to that, which is that a lot of sort of high monetary policy theory, and they talk about this idea of credibility all the time, and that the central bank has to have credibility, and it has to be believed when it says, okay, we're going to target 2% inflation. Let's set aside whether the central bank actually has the literal tools at its disposal to hit 2% inflation or to hit its employment mandate. There is this supposition that to hit these goals, there has to be some notion of credibility, and it's a little unclear where this credibility comes from. But if you start entering into the equation that it's downstream from politics and that politics is changing, then you start to introduce the possibility that credibility doesn't exist, and therefore, according to the sort of way many people see the world, suddenly these tools, whatever they are, become more impotent. And so there is maybe this impulse to just keep on moving as usual.
Right.
Keep that forward momentum going.
Yeah, I mean, for the way I've always kind of understood it is that like the Fed sort of is like the Vatican, and there's sort of a permanent. Well, the allegory doesn't exactly work because it's not like a new Fed chair is chosen at whatever every few years, but it's like people go and interpret the signs, and like, you know, you listen to the speeches and you're like, well, he could mean this. Always happens with Jerome Powell. I feel like people like hang on to his words and be like, what did he mean when he emphasized this or that? Like, what are they gonna? What policy does that portend?
You know, the interesting thing about this analogy, which we could take more seriously, and that is that in the Greenspan era, he was famously, like, they would use words like gnomic. Like, and he was actually almost purposely obtuse and really difficult to parse. And that was actually sort of the tradition, which was that they said very little. And you could imagine, if we're really going to torture this analogy, some sort of, the great financial crisis, sort of a Vatican II moment, where then they started, having press conferences. And, in the old days, they didn't even really issue like a statement. They just sort of let the rate float, and the market sort of then interpolated what the policy change would be. Then they started issuing a statement. Then they issued a press conference. Now there's tons of talking, and they actually sort of go out of their way to explain themselves in plain English. Now, to your point, there is still interpretation, because you can never have full understanding of exactly what's going on in their heads. But compared to the Greenspan era, there is this incredible effort underway, for better or worse, and some would actually argue worse, of this desire to take like these formerly technical things and explain them in the lay speak of the times.
Do you think that is, because you brought up post 08,
Yeah.
we're kind of like going all over the place, but
That's fine.
Some of that seems to probably, or I would think, would be downstream from the changes that occurred with the Fed post 08 in terms of, I'll say it's my belief, my understanding that the Fed basically fused with the major asset companies and, underwrites so much of just global finance and explicitly. And it seems to acknowledge its role in that, as before it would kind of like maybe, play a little hard to get.
Yeah.
But also, and this goes into, maybe this can get us back into like why Trump wants to politicize the Fed or wants to have a majority on the Fed. But also, the Fed sets interest rates, but then that has global implications. And it totally, I think it the role that it took post-8 globally in supplying liquidity completely changed. Well, whatever it says its dual mandate is, and it wants to only stick to the dual mandate, it does understand that it has a much larger role in the global economy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you're right that there's no way to get out of the 2008 environment in which the Fed unveiled all sorts of extraordinary measures, unveiling swap lines with other central banks to supply them with dollar liquidity, which is the subject of Adam Tooze's book, Crashed. There is no way to sort of reveal so much of your power to the public and not also have it be politicized in some way or some sort of more straightforward accountability. This is a point that I've been trying to make, which is that people talk about Fed independence. And that phrase is fine so far as it goes. It's not a fourth branch of government. It is accountable to the Congress.
Oh, but come on.
No, but I think
in the abstract it is. But that means that Congress has to then hold it to account.
To actually exercise that power. Right. And which, by and large, I don't think anyone really perceives it to be doing. I mean, I'm just saying, so formally, it is, as they say, a creature of Congress is the term I think people like to use. But I think you're totally right that there is no way for the Fed to have come out of that crisis having revealed so much capacity to backstop the system, to ply the system with emergency liquidity, to act with speed and elan and agility in a way that we didn't see when, for example, Congress failed to pass the TARP vote initially in, I guess it was late 2008. There's no way to come out of that and then the public not demand at least a little bit more understanding of like what it does, what it's capable of, why it's acting, and so forth, because it is extraordinarily powerful.
Well, Trump has made it a point to talk shit on Jay Powell at basically every opportunity. They had that little funny, I don't even know where they were like both in hard hats. Oh, it was in the building of the new building.
It was at the Fed.
Yeah. Well, of course, Jay Powell is taking kickbacks from all. Yeah, exactly. They didn't show that part. But the recent semi-firing of Lisa Cook, Trump has kind of declared war on the Fed. And why? I asked anybody but me at this table.
So I would say there's a few things going on. He wants lower rates. I mean, he's a real estate guy. And so I do think this is important, which is that I think he instinctively is a low rates guy. Mm-hmm. And he thinks that he seems to think, for one thing, that lower rates are your reward for good economic success. He says the U.S. economy is booming. Why haven't they lowered rates? Now, this is not, of course, how economists talk or think about the Fed ever, right? Because it's supposed to, in theory, it's supposed to be counter-cyclical. Things are running very hot. The Fed is supposed to hike rates, cool things down a little bit. Things are running cool. The Fed's supposed to lower. That's just the general how. Trump seems to conceive of lower rates as the reward for economic success. We are doing so well, therefore, why aren't you cutting rates? So he thinks that there's an element of that. I think the U.S. has very high interest rate payments these days on the national debt, which I think Trump perceives that if the Fed were to cut the short rates, the Fed controls the short end of the yield curve, but doesn't directly or automatically control the long end. I think he perceives that rates would come down across the board, and that would spur housing, and that would spur mortgages, and we'd spend less on the national debt. There's another factor which I think is interesting. Matt Klein, have you ever had him on the show? He's really good. He'd be a good one. He wrote a really interesting piece this weekend about the supervisory element of the Fed, which doesn't get as much attention, and this idea that, could a more politically captured Fed start putting its finger on the scale of banks and who lends to whom? And as he pointed out, this is not a new idea, and there are obviously efforts on the part of the left to are we going to curtail would we want to curtail lending to fossil fuel companies, of course, or would we want to impose some sort of marginal penalty? These are multi-party penalty on fossil fuel companies in terms of their act. These are conversations that precede Trump.
There was that Biden nominee who who was it? That
I
woman.
think Sarah Bloom Raskin.
Yeah, where they had like
Matt
pulled
Kahn talked about
a
this.
quote
Yeah,
from
yeah.
her
Yeah.
that she like couldn't. She said that like the Fed should basically
That's right.
direct.
So this is So this idea that were the Fed to have more of a sort of partisan slant,
Right.
that could it have more direct impact on the channeling of funds via the banking system? Perhaps, and that's an interesting question, and it doesn't get as much attention as rate policy per se. But these are live because then it becomes quasi-fiscal. There are some interesting implications from that avenue, which we may yet walk down.
I mean, it kind of already does, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about, again, not to like always bring it back to '08, but when you
Sure.
think about the ways in which it, like you said, was ready and able to use that, the tools within its toolkit, whatever.
That's where tools are.
There they go. There they are.
Toolbox. Yeah.
Oh, kit too, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me to like, I don't know. I just always, I think about what the kind of like floodgates that opened in '08. And I just think about when you look at how investment is directed globally, through asset management companies, basically based on yield, right? Not on public policy. And that kind of flowing directly out of the Fed in a lot of ways. All of this seems to be, yes, it's sort of it's degrees of different. I mean, it's a matter of degree, not difference.
I think by and large, the Fed has. I mean, the way I mostly still think about 2008 is that we had the mother of all bank runs. It was a gigantic bank run, and the Fed, by saying we're going to stand there we have infinite liquidity because they literally do have an infinite-sized balance sheet, more or less, kind of halted the bank run. I would push back a little bit, only specifically in the sense that by and large, I think the Fed is pretty neutral from a sectoral standpoint. I'm sure that there are counter arguments to that, and I do very seriously take the idea that there is no such thing as like an apolitical Fed, or that there is no such thing as this sort of referee purely in a vacuum without politics, et cetera. I do not believe that for an instant. By and large, though, I think the Fed takes pretty seriously this idea that it does not have like specific sectoral priorities, though obviously it works very much through the real estate channel, in part because interest rates, the real estate is the industry probably most sensitive to interest rates. Now, one of the things in the 2020 crisis, which, is kind of very brief in retrospect, was for the first time, it opened up backing of municipal debt, which is sort of gets a little bit more into what I think we think of as Congress's purview, because in a sense, a municipality is a private borrower, and do we want to be backing the choices of one state, which has its own fiscal priorities, versus another state? These raise some interesting questions that I think we often think of as more fiscal in nature. I think by and large it hasn't, but this is the road that I think we may be going down.
And I mean, I think that is part of the story of why the U.S. emerged a lot stronger than other countries, especially in Europe, because there was, the central bank was able to kind of step in ways that the ECB can't. And kind of just tap into all of these tools. Yeah,
I mean, the U.S. brought a lot of monetary and fiscal firepower to bear because of the toolkit, because of the experience, et cetera. And we came raging back in, I think, ways that no one would have anticipated in spring 2020. And probably for partly policy reasons and maybe some other structural reasons, we just haven't seen the same elsewhere in the rich world to any degree.
This actually gets me to, because you had a tweet the other day that I'm curious to ask you about, which was that you said, what's the best evidence that the Fed's rate hikes played an important role in bringing down inflation from its peak? And I'm curious what you think about that, because I will put my cards on the table and say that I am not of the opinion that monetary policy had much to do with or it really does have that much power over, especially in this situation with inflation that was primarily driven by these sort of like, black swan global supply shocks and also shocks to the labor market.
Yeah.
And it does feel like, reading through, like you say, in some of the like kind of Vatican style, like reading the tea leaves or whatever at Jackson Hole, not just in Jerome Powell's speech, but then in some of the papers that were presented. It seemed like everyone was in a little bit of an existential crisis over the potential limits of monetary policy, especially as it was looking at the global labor situation.
It's funny. So, like, I think this is I thank you for bringing this up, because I believe that the question of what happened between the years 21 through 2023, say, will be the source of PhD papers for decades to come.
And now podcast episodes.
And podcast episodes. But I think, look, there was a view in sort of the middle of 2021 when inflation started taking off and people started using this term transitory.
Yes.
Some people took that to mean it's going to be a short period of time. And other people took that to mean it will resolve itself when society returns to normal or something like that.
There's no normal.
Wait, you can just mean that?
Well,
yeah, it'll work itself out someday. That's what that's saying.
Yeah, well, look, we really did have an extraordinary shock to every aspect of life in 2020 and 2021.
Like, I remember Nancy Neal with the Kente cloth.
It was a weird time, and things are.
I kind of miss it. The Kente cloth craziness.
Yeah, well, it was great for podcasts.
Yeah, it was great for podcasts. 2025, it doesn't feel as normal as 2019, but it feels more normal than life in 2020 does.
Sure.
And so I think there is a reasonable view that you could say, well, as we return to something resembling normal, then the price disruptions and it would all settle down. Or there is this view, no, it's really important that because the Fed hiked rates aggressively, and I think by and large that there is a certain embarrassment at having use the word transitory, that maybe people interpreted it as just means short.
Well, yes, but that also felt like a really political move because it seemed like people were like transitory, so this will be over maybe by the 2024 election.
Yeah. Right. And look, there's a lot of desire to, did we spend too much on checks? Or the flip side is, were the lockdowns too aggressive such that there was, we have to revisit how much we disrupted the economy or take more serious? There are all these sort of implications that arrive out of, once we start going down the question of, well, why did inflation take off the way it did? There are a lot of questions that people would probably rather not discuss because their side or whatever is implicated in some of them. So they would the story that, well, the Fed hiked rates, monetary policy was very aggressive and easing in 2020, 2021. The Fed hiked rates, inflation came down. That's like a pretty nice story.
Right.
Because then you don't have to revisit some of the less comfortable questions that may implicate one side or another. But the link between those rate hikes and the cooling of inflation, it still seems a little bit unsatisfying to me, in part because the consumption on the part of households has remained quite robust. The unemployment rate has remained quite low by historical standards, though maybe there are signs that it's cooling now. The flip side would be there was this big cooling in the real estate industry, and so therefore there must have been some effect that fed through to inflation. If you talk to a Fed official and you say, well, what is the mechanism via which these rate hikes cooled inflation and ask to pin them down? You might be a little unsatisfied with the answer. They will say, well, this is very important because it showed our commitment to fighting inflation. Our commitment to fighting inflation kept inflation expectations in check. Keeping expectations in check is the precondition for having cool inflation. Is that a totally satisfying story to you? I don't know. I'm not totally satisfied by it.
So much of that sounds like woo-woo. You know what I mean? If we just believe, if we show people that we believe hard enough in fighting inflation, then inflation will lower.
I mean, this is not that off from exactly how they talk. This is not that.
Well, because it's one of those things too, where it's like if you continue to talk about inflation, people's expectations of inflation will go up, which will drive inflation. Like there's all this like weird way in which people play these games.
They put a lot of stake on what they would call like the expectations channel, and they'll say, "Okay, inflation, no, for real." So, I'm
tuning in.
But how do you establish what people? And it's very hard to measure what inflation expectations are.
Right.
or surveys, but then surveys, they can be very partisan in nature, and who knows. There are market-based measures that are not exactly inflation expectations, but sort of, as they say, the compensation that investors demand for taking inflation risk that can kind of be measured. But this is a very important element of how the modern central banks are conceived of, is their ability to keep expectations in check. Because if you expect higher inflation, you and your union are going to demand higher wages in the next. And then the grocery store is like, well, the union just got higher wages, so we're going to raise the price of oranges by that amount. This is the spiral they're talking about. And so the expectations channel is crucial to how they think about how this works.
The last thing I kind of want to ask about with the Fed before we kind of move on, and this is actually, I mean, this is tied into exactly what we're talking about, and the kind of like post-COVID situation plus inflation, which now is like, it's at what? It's sticky, but it's not. But it's not
warm.
sort of. Is that about with the tariffs? Is it not? Are we starting to see that? All these people say tariffs aren't inflationary. That's a fun discussion.
Yeah.
Or that they are, but we still haven't seen it. Whatever. But what was the Fed's, like, the position of the Fed as an institution going into the Trump administration versus kind of like the state of it now? Whereas, like, I mean, I don't know. I feel like this sort of like existential crisis that I'm kind of like talking about that I get from Jackson Hole, I feel like was like latent, is what I'm saying.
It may have been, but I do think, having spoken to several people on the FOMC by now, I think they take very seriously their nonpartisanship, and that the actions that emanate from the White House are things to be considered. So the tariffs are to be factored into how they view the evolution of the economy. And did the tariffs raise prices? Because, well, you could certainly make the argument why tariffs raise prices. Did the tariffs lower prices because they're a tax, and taxes slow the economy, and higher taxes generally are seen as disinflationary? I think they take all of these things pretty seriously from a sort of the textbook economic standpoint, and they look at the data as it evolves, which is a phrase they would probably say a million times. And the fact that the primary mover behind the tariffs is himself a big critic of Fed policy, I don't see much evidence that is a factor for them. Like, this is what the critics would say, oh, you don't like Trump, and therefore you haven't cut rates as aggressively as you otherwise would have. I don't think there's any evidence for that. It's true they cut rates 50 basis points last September, and they will say, and critics will say, well, this is evidence that you were supporting the incumbent Democratic administration, this aggressive rate cut 2 months before the election. On the other hand, they cut rates on the Thursday after the election, after Trump had already won.
That's why they call him Mr. Too Late.
Well, they cut it before and they cut it after, and then they cut again in December.
Dude, the one big cut before.
They did before and after the
now
election.
They created unemployment.
But
Joe Biden doesn't have a job.
Everyone forgot that cut.
No one talks about any of those cuts.
Yeah, they don't count.
No, Trump
Because it
did
was so high
talk.
before.
Trump did talk about it when it happened. Trump got really pissed off when it happened.
Yeah,
because I think he was ascribing to it a lot more importance than like nine. I don't think a single person moved a single vote.
I'm very skeptical. I do not believe that cut was motivated by some impulse on the part of the FOMC to affect the election, nor do I think it had. Is there any
That's what I'm saying. I don't think it had an effect on the election.
No, it didn't. It didn't. She lost.
Yeah.
So
I forgot.
She lost substantially.
This is how bad the Kamala Harris run was, is that when I started talking about this, in my head, Joe Biden was running for re-election.
Right.
I totally forgot that random ass lady ran.
By the time that 50, that was September. So
you got to hook her up. You just had Liz Truss on?
Yeah.
You got to hook her up with Truss, dude. Harris and Truss, that is a fucking
that would be a great
Well,
one.
Truss would have loved to have a central bank.
There's a big rehabilitation of Truss happening. But I think that's also just.
You think so? Because
I think it's a little bit of a contrarian.
I think it's just me. I think as a sort of a.
Are you an apologist?
As a Truss apologist, I can say that because I'm not. I'm not in the UK.
I didn't.
As a Truss apologist, It's interesting that you perceive the trust rehabilitation campaign to be
I feel
on.
like a little bit of there's like a trust nostalgia happening. Only because it's everything in the UK is so much significantly worse that it's sort of like,
Well, yeah.
but they're like, hey, wait a minute, maybe we misjudged these attempts.
Well, this is right. Like, so here we are, rates this morning, whatever day we're recording this, September 2nd, rates at the long end of the British yield curve hitting yet another multi-decade high. Trust, may accelerate that process, but it's pretty clearly that whatever the malaise or whatever like the sort of deep structural issues of Britain are, it wasn't Truss's fault. I mean, it wasn't her. It was
I'll
she
give her
stopped by
that.
for
It
a cup
wasn't
of-
her fault.
She was
that
there
all
for a
this
cup
is
of
happening.
coffee. And I think like the anger that people felt for her is like, well, something bigger was going on clearly.
This is a random, didn't plan on asking this, but just I have a question. Do you think the IMF is structurally capable of bailing out the UK?
I think it has to come from a military solution. I think.
What if it's the US?
No,
Talk about the
that's
Fed.
one military solution, but I think that some Macron-led sort of European army needs to
that would
invade.
be good for him.
I mean, genuinely, if you just put like a quarter of the British population in prison, then you could just at least, I don't know, make license plates in there.
It's
be
already
better
an
than whatever
island.
I don't know what they do there. I don't know what the job they have in England is besides being drunk.
Well, there's
the pub.
the city
Well,
of
there's still a lot
London.
of
The city
banking.
of London would
Yeah.
be saved by
Well,
the
that's-
city would be kind of like carved out.
They still make
of
a lot of
whatever.
nice cars there, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough for anyone in the industrial world, right?
Yeah.
now.
Well, that is a.
in the ex-China industrial world.
Well, I was about to say that
Yeah.
that's sort of the thing that's looming large over all
That's
this
right.
because, by the way, it does not have an independent central bank. China, they do have a central bank, but I believe
Yeah.
that they're not. It's not like the Fed or anything like that.
No.
They're like, this is our policy. You'll
Yeah.
follow the policy, and you got to admit, it's working pretty all right for them. So my
they don't
deal
have
with
much inflation right now.
yeah, but
At all.
my sort of like I'm of two minds about central bank independence.
Yeah.
One is that I don't fucking care
Sure.
because I don't really like the fiscal policies of any government administration that we've had in my lifetime, and certainly not most of them beforehand. And so if they don't follow them, they follow them. It's not really my problem, right? On the other hand, from a political perspective, I'm like, if I was elected president, I would be like, why can't I'm setting the policy? You have to listen to me.
It's a good question. I would say two things. First of all, I do think there's an interesting thing going on, which is that because Trump has been so vocal in his criticism of the Fed and his sort of not fully accepting the premise of what's called central bank independence, a lot of people are becoming these sort of hyper-orthodox types, like, oh, we must uphold.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting because 5 or 6 years ago, there were numerous voices that were not on the right who were questioning Fed independence, and it was actually a sort of very fashionable thing to say, like, question central bank independence in the 2010s, particularly in the period of sluggish employment. There was a very popular critique, employment growth coming out of the great financial crisis has been sluggish, in part because the Fed has the priorities of asset holders and so forth, and there's this sort of class war element, and the Fed is complicit in that, and so we should revisit some of our assumptions about how good Fed independence is. Now all those are sort of dropped because, again, because
Well, Obama's
Trump...
not president also.
Well, so all kinds of things have changed, but because it's Trump making the attack, suddenly some of these left heterodox voices are not as loud. But I do think it's
There have
important.
been some, though.
There's been some.
Tooze wrote a piece on
He did, you're right.
questioning
He did write.
Fed independence.
He
There's
did
been
write.
stuff in
He did write a good
Jacobin,
piece. Yeah,
too.
he wrote a good piece. You're right.
I mean,
yeah,
just-
okay, maybe I'm being unfair.
My-
But you're right.
No. I mean,
No,
but I think by and
you're right.
large, I mean, you saw like Krugman came out and was like immediately like, this is going to be like Turkey. You know, we got to defend this.
So this
as
is
a
the one thing
policy.
I'll say to your question, though. If you were the president, and I sort of got at this earlier, if you were the president and you had this economic vision and the Fed weren't lowering rates, you might be upset. But this is where I do think it's important to understand that structurally I do think the Fed should be understood as subordinate to Congress. Because you could say that about fiscal policy too, right? You could say, oh, I have an economic agenda, and it is illegitimate that Congress isn't allocating the money that I want. to
Well, he
pursue
did
my-
that.
Well, that too. But we sort of have this understanding, we have separation of powers, and we have this in our presidential system, the Congress has the, quote, power of the purse. So you may dislike the fact that the Fed isn't following your ambition, but in our system, that many financial matters are sort of legitimately or formally or legally or constitutionally the domain of Congress. And so you can whine about all you want, but that's not how our system is set up.
No, I mean, that's all true. Again, I would bring it back to, again, in the abstract versus like in practice, which is that like Congress, I don't even know what Congress is or does anymore, to be honest. Right. But
it's
at the
place
same
to go on
time,
TV.
Yeah.
It's a content creator.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, and ironically.
But on the flip side of that, even the idea of central bank independence really is only one emerged in the 70s as a kind of pushback to kind of Keynesian management. And as a, kind of part of, in partnership with deregulation of finance and the kind of like unleashing of free markets as a sort of organizing principle. And then only became orthodoxy like in the 90s. Especially with the IMF coming in.
And the idea of the 2% inflation target is very recent. I mean, this is very recent stuff. Yeah.
But so, I mean, I do think that it is, as a political concept, it is, like you say, it's treated now as this, you could never like fight back against it, or that any kind of criticism is obscene. But it is a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah, I go completely. I just think there is this phenomenon, and you sort of associate it frequently with countries that are, developing economies or whatever, where there is an elite class of people that emerge who go to places like conferences in New York, and they go to places like conferences in London or DC, and they sort of badmouth their own political leadership in their own country, and they say, oh, our leaders are so terrible, and they're so corrupt, and they're so forth, and what we really need is this hyper-orthodoxy. And they become the biggest believers of hyper-orthodoxy, are always this sort of, or frequently, this sort of educated international classes of countries that are often inflation basket cases. And they want their own political leaders to be handcuffed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, something, to bring it back to China a little bit, I do feel like the China question, which, you know what, I haven't done in a while?
Yeah, there it is.
I gotta hit the gong. The Dragon Rises. I mean, obviously, I don't think that
You're
Trump...
gonna write a book with a red cover?
Absolutely. No, I'm gonna do 500 YouTube videos about how China's economy is like days away from collapsing. Fuck, I can't remember that guy's name, the guy that does those, but he's speaking at the America First warehouse in Ronkonkoma this month. Which just goes to show I think China's doing pretty good.
Great. Yeah.
But obviously I don't think Trump is messing with central bank independence or sort of doing these toe in the water things because of China. But I mean that is the big kind of dragon in the room right now. And it's apparently I saw there was some headline that like she, because she met with Modi. Yeah.
He said something about the dragon and the elephant.
They dance.
So it's okay to use these cliches now.
I know. It's like, she gave us permission.
These lame tropes that everyone always uses. Maybe it's like
I love it.
But do people talk about India like that? The elephant wakes. The sleeping elephant.
The sleepy elephant is cute.
Well, yeah, the West has finally tugged its tail. But China is doing pretty well,
seems like it.
as we all know and love to know. And it does seem like a part of, in general, I'm not talking about just the Fed now, but it seems like that is kind of on the mind of a lot of people making the decisions in this country right now, especially when it comes to technology. But when it comes down to like fiscal policy or anything like that, there's been all this.
Deep insecurity.
Yeah, and there's been these sort of goofy, I don't know what to call them, takes. I feel like that's an insulting enough way to call them, about how America's becoming more like China because Trump took out like a 10% stake in Intel, was it?
Yeah, he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which just, shows that like America is becoming sort of aping this model of Chinese socialism. how much do you think that like is going through their heads about China when it comes down to talking about not only central bank policy, but just like industrial policy in general?
Yeah.
Here?
I think, and this is a bipartisan thing, I think there is this sort of wish that the U.S. government could move with the speed and with the lack of checks and balances that are perceived to not exist
Yeah.
in China. And I have to say, like, I am not by any means an expert on the Chinese political system. My gut is that the degree to which, Beijing or Xi Jinping just sort of acts as a quote, authoritarian is overstated, that there is more politics
Definitely,
in China than people like to, than people will acknowledge. All that being said, it seems clear that there is it's hard to do certain things here. It's hard to get the incentives right to build a nice rail system that people would like to see. Whatever.
Even a crappy rail system.
Even a mediocre rail system, yeah. And I think there is this sort of anxiety that how we have structured democracy in this country is an impediment to some of these engineering goals we have. And I think you see that all over the place. And I do think Trump himself looks around the world and sees leaders that he perceives as not having facing the checks and balances that he has, and that is annoying to him.
I mean, I think that, we basically just said this, but just to be explicit, that seems to animate everything from, like you said, some of what Trump is saying, but also like all the abundant stuff. I mean,
that's trying to be liberal China. People are just trying. I think this is
China with liberal characteristics.
Well, in various ways, people are trying to do a liberal Chinese socialism without ever saying the latter two words. And in the case of abundance, with barely mentioning China throughout the book, which is
interesting. Well, yeah. So I did think that was interesting. That virtually no mention. No one has an excuse not to have read that book. I mean, unless you really don't want to.
It's about 40 pages long.
It's a quick read.
Our listeners don't need to. We read it for you.
I personally think it's immoral to participate in a discourse about a book without. So that's why I did read the book.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I started tweeting. I was like, I got to read it.
Yeah.
But it is a quick read. I agree. The Chinese economic model with Western liberal characteristics. Now, I do think, again, they didn't really talk about the production of stuff that much in the book.
They can't. I doubt there's a single person engaged in the Marxist sense productive labor that probably read that book. So
but they don't talk about goods. They talk about housing and they talk about energy. They talk about sort of biotech and sort of basic science. They don't talk about. They didn't talk about cars, and I would say to their credit, it is not an important part of their agenda that the U.S. is a major car manufacturer. They don't have, again, to their credit, they don't have or to their detriment, I don't know. They don't have the manufacturing fetish that a lot of politicians or discourse take-havers often seem to have. So I think there are good reasons why actually there was not much China presence in the book, but there was a little bit.
But at the same time, I do think that it's not a coincidence. I mean, not to psychoanalyze on a grand scale, although I am now that I say that. But I don't think it's a coincidence that in a moment of increasing resource constraint, we're talking about abundance as this utopian idea.
Yeah.
And also talking around resource constraints.
Yeah. This is, look, it feels to me like, the 2010s post-GFC resource abundance was the story, right? There was a lot of labor, and that is what enabled the rise of companies like Uber, was so much labor, or Grubhub, or whatever, and there was a lot, there was a lot of cheap money and a lot of stuff. And now we are in an era clearly of resource constraints. Commodities continue to be scarce, even though prices have come down. The U.S. economy has decelerated, and yet the unemployment rate is still at 4.2%. There is only so much energy and electricity. That is, there's only so much electrical gear. On the morning we're recording this, we got the latest report from the ISM. Once again, another month of shortage of electrical gear. This is the dominant story probably for a long time. And speaking of a Jackson Hole paper, there was a good paper by the Bank of Japan Governor Ueda about economics and of an aging population. And an aging population will create greater strains on the productive labor force every month, and it'll grow every month as society gets older. So that work that has to be done, whether the government pays for it, whoever pays for it, that work of changing nursing care for the elderly, physical space for the elderly, changing their bedpans, et cetera, someone has to do it. And that is work, that is labor that then cannot be allocated towards something else. And
Well, it's
that feels
also-
like a
it's
great
also not
strain.
productive.
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's some of the least productive labor that there is.
Well, that and there was some like crazy. Maybe I just fell for like a fucking meme or whatever. But it was like
I do that.
I
a
love to
huge
fall for
percentage
memes.
of jobs here in New York City are home care jobs.
Yeah.
You see those ads on the subway. I
Yeah.
actually want to do an episode on this.
You should.
Which is I saw the same tweet you did a few months ago. Or whatever.
Yeah.
But you see those ads about how you can get paid to take care of your relatives in New York City. Like they advertise them on the subway.
There's a terrible like pyramid scheme involved in here. This.
I really want to figure
I
out
hope
what the
not.
economics of that are.
I guarantee
yeah.
doing it in certain parts of South Brooklyn, maybe with certain Eastern European populations, there's probably a lot, just like all the pharmacies down there.
That's actually perfect. What we kind of like meandered into, because I want to actually talk about the macro situation
Sure,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
U.S. And you've talked about on your show that this is like making sense of the economy right now is the hardest it's ever
Yeah.
maybe been.
And I feel bad saying that because I probably have said it at 10 or 11 other times.
But
in my
that's something
career.
that can be
But it
true
is-
that
yeah.
every time you say it.
But-
because
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, it just gets
as long as
harder.
it's 0.1%
But it is
higher.
But it
weird,
is
yeah.
true. Like we're saying, okay, unemployment is theoretically at what do you say, 4.2%,
Yeah,
and
it's low.
all the jobs should be great, but then also we're getting in all of these numbers and these benchmark reports that paint a pretty not great picture of the
Yeah.
economy, and revisions are going to be published next week, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
I think
Don't quote me
people
on
are
that.
anticipating some not great news out of that. We've seen that right now. It's taking longer and longer for people without jobs to get jobs.
Yes.
And my understanding, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, which I think I might be, but is that labor income is doing really well, but there's basically like job growth is non-existent.
Yeah, the pace of new job creation has definitely slowed down. I think the evidence is pretty compelling that sort of recent grads
Yeah.
are having a hard time finding
Definitely.
work. This seems to be pretty clearly a true thing. If you look at the most recent jobs report, setting aside the fact that many of the headline numbers, have been revised, will probably get revised again, et cetera, most sectors of the economy haven't been adding jobs lately, with the exception of the healthcare and
Yep.
social care sectors. One of the bizarre things about the economy is that the tech sector is not adding jobs, despite the fact that tech companies are doing better than ever,
Yeah.
as measured by the stocks. Historically, I think you could generally draw a line. If you drew a line of the relative performance of tech stocks relative to tech hiring, I think the lines would look somewhat similar. Those lines, I think, are divorced right now, in which you have these companies that are doing fantastically well every year or every quarter, beating profits, and the stocks hitting record highs without adding much to headcount. That is a weird situation. And so, yeah, there's a lot of strange aspects of this, but also this idea, and again, maybe it comes down to some of the demographic strains. It could also come down to the sort of real economic strains imposed by AI due to pressure on the electricity grid, et cetera, where you have this economy that isn't firing on all cylinders, and yet we're not in a period of slack, right? We're not in a period where there's just a lot of unused capacity because there are these, I guess, really two engines of the economy, which is the aging of the population and AI
Yeah.
that impose some distinct strains on our productive capacity.
Well, I mean, to bring it back to Jackson Hole for a second,
Yeah.
Powell, in his speech, he said, while the labor market appears to be in balance, it is a curious kind of balance that results from market slowing in both the supply
Yeah.
of and the demand for workers.
Yeah, this sort of the low hiring, low firing has been the sort of watchword, buzzword phrase for a while.
Yeah.
And it's also complicated because we know the immigration picture has changed dramatically in the last
Right.
couple of years. And so then there's the question of like, okay, well, hiring, the pace of new job creation has slowed down, but we don't need as many new jobs to be created because there is not this influx of population the way there had been in previous years. Yeah, it creates a tricky picture.
But it's funny. We were just talking about abundance. One of the abundance guys, I always forget his name. Not
Ezra Klein,
the other
Derek
one.
Thompson.
Derek Thompson. He tweeted something that I didn't read. I mean, I read the tweet, but I didn't click his thing.
Who among us?
He was talking about demographic stuff, and he
Mm-hmm.
was saying that, like, oh, for the first time, the U.S. population might be in decline in 2025,
Oh, that's interesting.
which is, I believe that's what he said, but don't quote me on that, even though I'm saying it out loud. But that, again, this was, you brought up that BOJ paper,
Yeah.
but that everyone is talking about, it seems, or everyone is very concerned about demographic
Mm-hmm.
changes, and not in the Elon Musk kind of way, but in the sense of like what it means for the labor market.
Yeah, a lot of people are concerned in the Elon Musk kind of way.
Sure,
too.
but I'm
Yeah.
not talking about that.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the dark side of that, but the kind of really
Yeah.
the issues with the supply of labor, but also productivity.
Yeah.
Right.
This is one of those rare topics, too, it occurs to me. This is one of those rare topics that is truly global because it includes China.
Yes,
This is
yeah.
actually maybe
Yes.
one of the only sort of truly, it includes North Korea.
It includes everyone.
North
yeah.
Korea is seeing is seeing a collapsing fertility rate and an aging demographic.
They're spending
Not
too
as
much
bad as
time.
South Korea.
Spending too much time
I
mining
don't think
Bitcoin.
it's much better.
Really? Maybe Koreans
was
just don't
surprised.
like sex. Those are
Currently,
about
I don't
as-
think anybody does anymore.
That's true. It is scary and it hurts, but it is like, and also the way I do it, you can't have a baby. But that is interesting because North and South Korea, you couldn't imagine two more different systems,
Maybe this is the basis for unification.
really, of the world. Where
Sure.
like we need people to start having sex. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I sort of learned during COVID when people were like, well, the reason there's so many Italians dying is because every Italian is 95 years old. And I think we see that reflected in sort of the huge strain on welfare states in Western Europe, and welfare states anywhere, but particularly like the really successful ones in Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking it up, the health home care thing in America, New York does have like way more at-home healthcare aids or whatever you want to call it than basically any other state does, or than any other state does. There is this like combination of like everyone's getting older. There is these huge sort of like technological leaps and bounds, which actually haven't really manifested themselves in the labor space yet, but everyone's sort of girding themselves to. I think one thing that can't be discounted is that like AI is hanging over all of this as both like as a complete game changer and as something that will like fix everything. And I just do not think that. I think that it will be eventually, but I think a lot of people are sort of hyping this up as in like by the end of this year or maybe next year, half of jobs are going to be gone. They'll be replaced by AI. Everything will be much more efficient. I have not read much on what they want to do with everyone who's out of a job when that happens, but I'm sure that will sort of just work itself out of the way that things do. It's interesting because I think everyone is like, there's a hugely changing labor market right now, but nobody knows quite what to do with that fact besides just like bring on AGI, which is something they made up a couple of years ago.
Well, labor productivity has been in decline since the 70s across the globe. And
I've been a huge contributor to that.
there was, I think, in the US, it picked up in the 90s and the 2000s briefly because of a lot of tech adoption. But it really, I mean, from my understanding, again, is that kind of was short-lived, and a lot of it was seen in retail because of a lot of e-commerce that was like a new, and the thing is with all this like tech adoption is that, you get these new tools, and in the case of the 90s and 2000s, it's like spreadsheets or, calling centers or what, all this stuff that the information superhighway brought us. But all of that kind of fades unless there's like major breakthroughs that significantly change the landscape.
It's really weird. I think I do this has been something on my mind, which is that everybody is trying to figure out what if any will be the productivity effect of AI, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is asking this exact same question, and I'm curious about that myself. But if you just think how radically technologically different our lives are today than, say, 15 years ago, or 2010 or 2006 when the iPhone was introduced. I mean, our lives are massively different. Our lives, and yet you would not really see it in productivity data. And I think that's it's hard to wrap our head around that fact that the technology has transformed our lives, and in a sense, many things seem to be more productive because we have all this technology, and yet it does not, at least any way that we measure productivity, the last 20 years or 19 years since, how long, 19 years since the iPhone was released,
Shit.
does not feel, I know, does
That's
not
crazy.
feel, has not seemed like, oh, some incredible productivity breakthrough per se. Like, I think that's weird. So I think, like, when we think about the effect that AI...
I don't think there
will
has
have-
been.
Right. But so this is so before we even begin to ask the AI question,
Right.
it's interesting to ask why we haven't seen any measured productivity gains or major productivity gains, despite the fact that the technology has obviously transformed virtually every aspect.
I'm going to go
of
with
our
the
lives in the
dumbest
last 19
explanation
years.
for that
Yeah.
I can possibly think of. Everyone's on their damn phones all the time.
I know.
It like
I don't
literally
think-
might be
this
part
might
of
be
that.
it. Like I
I s-
really, yeah.
Yeah, I say that as somebody whose job before this was working in manufacturing. A lot of guys look at those phones all the fucking time.
No,
Not me, but a lot of guys.
Yeah. No, unironically. Because you think about things, you look around society, and a lot of things don't work as well as they used to, right?
Yeah, that's so
we
true.
don't build airplanes as well as we used to at Boeing, right? I don't
A lot
know
of
anything
lawsuits about that.
We don't. There are more delay. There are more mega delays, 4-hour plus delays. I saw an interesting blog post about this recently. Very catastrophic delays at airports are worse than they used to be. Various things like that. Why is that? Is it because everyone is looking at their phones? I don't think that's like a crazy thing to explore at all.
I think that there is like a sense, and this is, I guess, kind of hard to quantify, that everyone's just kind of dumber, even if you intellectually may still operate on in some way at the same level. There's no way that just looking at slop, which is 99% of what's on your phone, even if it masquerades as something else, is making you smarter. It may not be making you actively dumber.
It's definitely not making you smarter.
But it's not making you smarter.
Definitely not.
And it's kind of hard, and also like the sort of effects of people's attention spans, to irritability, to mood, to sleep levels.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think there is like
And just literally like social interactions. and all the
exactly. I have
knockoff
like a
effects
sort of
from that.
Gladwellian, all-encompassing view of the
I don't
iPhone.
know.
as the,
I think about this a lot. I think this view needs to be taken more seriously than it does. And it's sort of, it's a joke. Everyone's looking at their phones all the time, and that's why. No, let's take this seriously as a possibility of this sort of derangement of society and this sort of evident dysfunction that we can kind of see all around us.
It seems like no one wants to admit it because we're all on our phones.
Well, what do we do? Yeah. What
And
what am I
also,
doing on my
mean,
phone?
That's not just, but also like more and more economic activity is dependent on the phone, even if it's
Yeah.
not productive. But if you say that, like, we'll say, this is my favorite thing to talk about, but the explosion of the small business owner via Instagram post-COVID and all the other channels is so fascinating to me. And just the sort of like, and which is also bled out of the sort of just like in the American context because of the nature of social media, but that the sort of small business entrepreneur via Instagram, via OnlyFans, whatever kind of channel you want to talk about, is just a
Patreon.
really, all of them. That to me is such an interesting phenomenon. And I think that, I always think about this with the like TikTok ban, which is, it's so funny that there's a congressional law that no one fucking cares about.
Yeah.
But we saw such an incredible like democratic, rising. The people rose up and said, no, you will not ban TikTok when that was being floated, because it's such an income stream for so many people, and not just income, like in a, literal sense, and it's like the dream of the income too, right? Everyone wants to get famous via all of these channels, and that's kind of part of it. And I think, you know, there's a lot of idealism that gets kind of wrapped up in this idea of like, well, the phones can't actually be that bad because I also really, it's not just that I want to be distracted, but they also might be a kind of road out towards, I mean, gambling as well. Like there's all of these channels that
The blockchain.
The blockchain.
always the blockchain.
That's my deal. Is, you know, you're asking like what is missing from people's analysis, and I think it's just the failure of Americans to adopt the blockchain
To get on the chain.
Web3.
Get on chain.
I mean, it's so crazy. I think about this, and this is getting too off topic, so we don't need to really spend any time on this. I just think about this all the time. Is that like there was these sort of two big hype cycles prior to the AI one that are specifically like kind of digital, right? You had the Bitcoin one or the coin one, meme coin, whatever.
Yeah.
That was like an NFT hype cycle that was like really like kind of the basis for it that just like petered out and went nowhere. It was like a total.
This was like the 2021 one.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah. And then in general, like blockchain technology, which was like something that, like AI, you could just not escape. And their use case was always something to do with hospitals, because that's always how they get you. I know I've talked about this on the show before. This is always how tech people try to get you. Is they're like, well, actually, this will be really good for hospitals to use.
right.
It's really funny.
Yeah, like what would change? Probably
You know what?
nothing.
It's funny. So it's funny you say that, because the other day I was in the airport and I was like, you know what? I'm going to finally do this. I'm going to Google, or I'm going to ask ChatGPT what Palantir does. Because I was like, you know, I just want to get to the bottom of this. I had some time to kill. So I was like, all right, let's, and I started asking, put together a very serious prompt into GPT-3 to understand. It gave me something about hospital supply chain.
No, it did not.
Yeah,
Well, no,
it did.
that's one of
It
their big
did.
things. That's how they got the NHS contract. Yeah,
Yeah, it gave me, and so, yeah.
I
there's
just say
something-
they're like based McKinsey.
they do.
I think it is.
Yeah.
But
they do
were,
database
It's
integration.
like, yeah, ontology of all these different things.
Oh,
and then
God.
suddenly the room is available. Anyway, this was, ChatGPT wrote me up this very nice white paper that could have probably, you know, of like, and then of what Palantir does, but it was all based around making a hospital more efficient. Because who
Yeah.
doesn't want that?
Well, exactly. And that's what they say about AI too. Like AI will vastly improve outcomes in healthcare.
Yeah.
It'll make like our, you know, wildly inefficient medical system much more efficient. How they're doing that, I don't know. But that's how I know that there's like another cycle. And, you know, we've
This
talked
is a good take.
a little bit about AI in this episode, but I kind of want to bring it to that a little bit more because
yeah.
I think there is some hesitation right now. I think a lot of the luster has worn off to a degree. I think that all of us have made our Elon Musk Grok Imagine. You know, you can make a knight kissing a rose with a fairy dragon princess. We've made thousands of those. We've all made a small. Well, mine have mostly involved sort of playing dolls with Mae Musk in every sense. But I think that there is now some slowing down of that hype cycle and people wondering like, well, wait, when is this actually going to happen? And like, what is it? And like, why hasn't it happened
There's
yet?
something weird going on. Well, first of all, I think that if you went back to, I guess it was November 2022, when ChatGPT first came out, I think a lot of people would have expected that by now the economy would have been transformed
Totally,
much more
yes.
than it has. Which is, at some point, it's like, all right, let's see some results here.
Yeah.
Because it's always 6 months away or 2 years away or whatever. But it is kind of mind-blowing technology without having had much of an impact so far, except that everything's gotten weirder.
School. It has made school worse.
Congratulations.
And
Yes.
advertising.
It has made those fucking Skechers ads on the subway,
Yeah.
which
What about the J. Crew one?
the J. Crew one, but
The
also
aesthetics of our world around
Porn.
us
It's all porn.
They look bad.
But it's not just porn, it's like nostalgia porn
Yeah.
too, because everything is recycled, right, from the past. And so it's this like really aggressive nostalgia that is, I think, very subjectively limiting.
in a way that's kind of good because I think so much of the U.S. economy is just shuffling around money and like moving it
Sure.
one from place to the other. It's
Little
like
card
yeah,
trick.
you might as well just like shuffle around like memories to make whatever the fuck ChatGPT is putting out.
So we were talking about AI before we started recording,
Yeah.
and I was saying that one of the things that I'm really like focused on is this idea that because you've written and kind of talked about you're not afraid to use the S word. More and more people are using it, but more and more people are talking about stagflation.
Oh, yeah.
And this kind of like
Yeah.
that AI is potentially part of this major like stagflationary setup where it's sort of this like bizarre conundrum, it seems like, where AI then, because it needs to use like, you know, it is soaking up so much capital.
Yeah.
And water.
Yeah.
Which is a real thing. I vacillated, but now I'm back to being like, actually, it does take too much fucking water.
No, but it's true.
It's true.
But no, but like literally, like we are spending so fucking much on AI capex that it is, you know, potentially both a drag on and then also propping up the economy at the same time.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it because, you know, one of my favorite guests that we've had on our podcast a few times, this guy Chris Hatch, he's a real estate developer. I think he's based out in Utah, but he does drive-through coffee shops like for Starbucks and then Dutch Bros, etc. Anyway, we talked to him because he can't, at times over the last several years, he hasn't been able to open as many drive-throughs as he's wanted to because there is a shortage of electrical gear.
Yeah.
There's one industry that is just buying tons and tons of electrical gear. And maybe that's okay because if AI is going to deliver these great tech breakthroughs, then I'm cool with not having as many drive-through coffee shops. Like we could talk about that trade, and I think maybe it's fine. But in the meantime, that's just the reality, which is that the technology has not delivered these abundant productivity gains that many people hope. But in the meantime, we have fewer drive-through coffee shops and anything else that really relies on electrical gear, which is literally everything. And so I do think that there is this weird phenomenon right now where AI is powering the stock market. And the stock market is playing a big role in powering consumption. And that consumption continues to feed through into making the economy more or less grow and keep unemployment down and so forth. On the other hand, that same investment in AI is also constraining investment in other places, is probably pushing interest rate costs up, is probably making it harder to, at the margins, build homes somewhere, build office space or whatever. So at the same time, you have this major driver of economic growth via maybe the stock market channel or these like crazy incomes that they're getting out there in Silicon Valley. You also have this thing that is acting on a drag on new investment anywhere else, which is what's creating this weird dynamic. We don't know how it resolves, but it's kind of scary because on the one hand, suppose it's a bubble and a burst. Or at some point people wake up and they collectively conclude this tree of technology that we're climbing is not getting us anywhere, and we're going to cancel a bunch of spending. Well, then you could imagine the stock market plunges, you go into recession, et cetera. Not great. On the other hand, if somehow it, quote, works out, et cetera, and which we don't even know what that looks like. None of us know what that looks like. If it works out, well, then the world is going to change, too. It's like, all right, it's finally paying off. What does that mean? Millions of people losing their jobs each month? So it's this puzzle that we don't know how it resolves, but either way it resolves does not sound particularly enticing right now. It's just a different sort of weird. Different sort of bad, maybe.
Kind of push that a little further in two ways, which is one, it's not, in my opinion, it's not just that it's crowding out, if you want to use that term, other investment, but that also, like, the big massive spend is with these data centers, which don't employ anybody.
That's right.
And raise electricity prices. I mean, mine has gone up like crazy that I've noticed. And, you know, everyone's tracking it. They're driving up electricity prices. So there's something inherently stagflationary about just even the investment.
Yeah, I think
like on
there
that
is.
level.
Yeah, I definitely think there is.
And then on the flip side, I mean, you said, okay, if there's a bubble, that would be bad. We go into a recession, whatever. But I want to push that. Like I said, I want to push that further, which is that, you know, we're talking about like the Mag 7.
Yes.
Which are increasingly, I think it's, you know, the highest concentration.
That's right.
Of, you know, this like narrow band of equities in the S&P, like.
Yeah.
Of all time.
Yeah, I think so.
And the spend that these guys are, I mean, most of them are spending on AI is astronomical. I mean, it's like shocking numbers. I think they want to, by 2030, we're talking about like $1 trillion.
Yeah, the numbers are unreal.
It's unreal. But also, I mean, we didn't really talk about the dollar, which is fine, but this gets back to some of the stuff we were sort of talking around, especially with China as this like looming, China and this potentially like what people like to say multipolar or kind of, new global setup, which is that if that AI bubble pops, like the Mag 7 is basically underwriting a lot of U.S. dominance in global markets.
Yeah, I believe that.
To the point where even like I think people's ideas about what underwrites U.S. deficits is a little bit dated, right? It's not the petrodollar really anymore.
Yeah, no.
Especially after 2014.
It's the absolute dominance of a handful of tech companies in basically every market around the world, excluding China.
Right.
And the degree to which the Metas of the world, the Alphabets of the world, and the Microsofts of the world, et cetera, are absorbing the profit margin of every other entity, both U.S. entities and non-U.S. entities, and pulling money, sucking it into the United States is happening on such a grand scale. If something were to if that train gets derailed in some way, it's interesting because I think like a few years ago you talk about like sector rotation. Right? Tech is very hot these days, but maybe healthcare.
We used to call it FANG.
Yeah, that's right. It's changed a few times. So there was FANG, and then there was FANG, then FANG Plus, and whatever. But like decades ago, like tech was just another sector, right?
Yeah.
In the 80s or 90s, there was the tech sector, but maybe the industrials are doing well, maybe the pharmaceuticals are doing well. Today, it feels like it's just the tech sector, and it's hard to imagine. Try to imagine at any time soon people getting really excited about whatever is left of the industrial sector or the pharmaceutical sector as really important global players that contribute to the wealth of the United States. It's getting harder. So it really is just like about 7 companies versus every other industry almost in the entire world right now. And the U.S. sort of, whatever you want to call it, our financial stability, our financial health increasingly feels like it relies on that train not getting derailed.
But this is also part of, in my opinion, this is all part of the same story as central bank independence being like under attack or dollar dominance waning and this kind of like stagnation in the economy, right? Because when we say like, okay, thinking through like what an AI bubble popping would look like.
Yeah.
What we're talking, what would it do to U.S. dominance in markets globally? And then following that, because of the geopolitical situation, which is very different, everyone always likes to compare. Oh well, it's like the .com. It's like I don't think it's like the .com, right? We're talking about something far more significant on 2 levels, right? One, on the level that I'm talking about, which is that, of course, Treasuries underwrite the U.S. deficit, but like we're saying increasingly, especially since 2014 and 2015, like this narrow band of equities is bringing in bringing in capital into the U.S. And on the other side of it is how much of the population is dependent on 6 to 8% returns. And for so long. And so when we talk about the kind of further implications of a fall of U.S. dominance in global markets, like I don't know if we understand what that looks like.
No, I don't. I think when you think about the sort of standard of living that Americans have, when you think about how much we import and therefore, and especially when it comes to just sort of consumer goods and so forth, our capacity to do that. People want to be paid in dollars. People want to be paid in dollars, I think, for a few different reasons. One is, the U.S. has this fairly long-standing history of a stable economy, a stable political system, a profitable political system. It's also something, speaking of these big companies, if you want to invest in these companies, by which I mean literally, if you want a share of NVIDIA's future income stream, if you want to buy some of that for yourself, if you want to buy some future Amazon profit stream, you have to have dollars to do that. You buy that stream in dollars. That stream is denominated in dollars and so forth. But I do think we don't really have a conception of what it looks like if that runs out, because again, you exclude that it's not clear like what else is really working productively right now in the U.S. economy.
I should add that, like, I think it's the majority of the companies in the Magnificent Seven are either all in on AI or are like dependent entirely on, in the case of NVIDIA, dependent on AI for success. And so, like, my view, and this is the most layman of layman's sort of views on these things. It's really more of a feeling, but since, you know, I've been reading about it, I feel like that's how all economists kind of work, just based on a gut feeling.
Vibes, yeah.
It's true, and I'm like, well, if they go all in on AI and like that doesn't really pan out, then there is a bubble there. I think there might be like the bubble might reconstitute itself and be a little more impervious the next time. But I think we are going to run up to some some frictions in onboarding, let's call it, and that could deal like a serious fucking blow to those companies, which are like, I mean, what is it? It's like they have a huge. It's like most people are invested in them that have investments.
Yeah, if you have an investment, you're exposed to them to a significant degree.
Exactly, and like that could cause some problems. And again, like to go back a little bit, if it does work out, if AI is everything they say it is, and it starts replacing every truck driver in America with fucking, I don't know how they're going to build these things, but maybe they have, you know, some new AI-driven, AI.
It'll be Optimus.
Plans.
That's what Elon said today.
making
He was like,
itself-
Optimus is going to drive all of Tesla's
Oh, thank God.
profits in like 2 to 3 years.
But it's like okay, well, trucking is like the job that employs like I think the most people in the U.S. or
Yes.
at least it did last time I looked it up. And you replace all those people. There is no people aren't even like whispering about a plan. They think they're gonna dust off UBI at some point and bring it back out. But like it seems like from my perspective, it's almost like no matter what. I mean, kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Either way is no matter
Some sort of big disruption.
no matter
is
who
coming.
wins, you lose.
Well, I don't think right. If we actually have if something called AGI is achieved, which I don't know, but like then what? Like no, who knows?
I mean,
I'm not looking forward to
I would
that.
say like my way of splitting the baby on this is like, let's say we've hit a plateau with the kind of like super intelligence or whatever that they can get out of LLMs, which like people are kind of, especially after ChatGPT 5, people pretty like disappointed. I couldn't tell you the difference in a lot of these things.
Well, it's been less overtly sexual with me, but I've cracked it.
But I do wonder if we have like barely scratched the surface in terms of like efficiency and algorithm design, and that like really those are the things that will drive scale. But the problem is that, at least from my perspective, and we can hit the gong on this one, which is like that this is where again China kind of comes in, which is that
The dragon rises.
I mean, the U.S. company, I'm specifically thinking of ChatGPT, and I do think there's other incentives at places like Microsoft and Google that are maybe more interested in like enterprise solutions, as they like to say. Although I was reading today, you'll love this phrase, that AI is eating into SaaS profits.
No, are you fucking kidding me? They've taken everything. They've taken our futures. They've taken our jobs. They've taken our education. They told young white men like me, there is one path forward for you.
We need to B2B SaaS in terms of we need to get back to
Back to
SaaS.
basics. SaaS.
Yes.
What the fuck? How is it eating into it?
But because it's like it's soaking up too much profits.
No!
With the cost.
I need to reinvest those into Fiverr. Well, the guys I hire from Fiverr to do my BTP
But so
SaaS.
like when we talk about like AI scale, right?
Yeah.
Like I was saying this to you before we started recording, but I was like reading a lot about kind of comparisons to Japan in the 80s and 90s, and that for people who don't know, like Japan and the US were in a kind of tech war back then in terms of computer hardware and software. Yeah. And Japan had this huge project. It was like a decade long called 5th Gen. I think it was just called 5th Gen. I don't remember. But and they developed some like really interesting technology, both hardware and software, but everyone in the world ended up adopting U.S. computers and computer software because it was the personal computer and it was scaled for individual use and it was cheap and it was easy to get. And Japan kind of fucked up there a little bit in that rollout. And when we look at what China is doing with their approach to LLMs, and even just like looking at how they're deploying this tech, which is basically like open source, cheap, not really like the kind of U.S. black box. We're gonna achieve some super intelligent, quasi mystical, demigod or whatever. Altman wants or whatever these people want. Like they're kind of deploying this to then see how it gets adopted, teaching people how to use it.
It does feel like this is the case.
Yeah.
It does feel like this is the case, which is that this sort of, and I'm not an expert here, and I haven't talked to a ton of people hands-on, but this sort of mystical way that U.S. American technologists talk about it. As in, there is this, we're building towards some sort of God or something like that, versus this sort of what I perceive and what I read and what I've heard from some people is this more pragmatic, we want to build tools that exist out in the world and people will hopefully find some productive use from them. And I don't know if they talk about, the same AGI and some of these mystical things to the same degree, but they do definitely talk about, no, we want to have people in factories, in productive establishments, using these tools and finding if they can create efficiencies for them. But to your point, or to your analogy, which I think is a good one, it just may be that at some point, because it's open source, or many of these models emanating out of China are open source. And I think the perception is that they're not quite as good as the closed source best model from OpenAI. But I don't see why that has to be some law of nature that they're always going to be slightly behind, or that every enterprise is going to need the most cutting edge model for whatever it is that they're using. It certainly seems plausible that globally the open source models become, widely adopted in industry.
Well, I think that a big difference too is that the Chinese seem to be on like a government level or structural level, really interested in unfettering the forces of production. Whereas in the U.S., it's a little hazier, right? Like, I don't, the forces of production have kind of been sold off or moved piecemeal to other countries, and we might sort of unfetter them using AI, but they're like,
or refetter them,
but like they're probably not going to be in America, even so.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's a sort of a different. It's a similar thing with like the central bank policy, right? Like there's a degree of independence that like the tech people here have, which I think that a lot of people, no matter how, I'm a liberal, I'm as liberal as they come, but no matter how liberal you are, you might be like, well, I don't know if that's such a good idea. People point to like the whole Jack Ma thing as like this sort of like strike against China. I'm like, well, I'd like to do that to one or two guys. You know what I mean? Like, well, you ride a bicycle now and like you teach at a community college, to a Bezos character. I think just it builds, it helps people.
Builds character.
Well, yeah, they did it to the fucking king.
Rectification campaign.
Exactly. I always thought that the way that they treated Puyi, I think was his name, I was like, that's gentle, right? They were like, we're not going to do what the Bolsheviks did. We're not going to shoot you. You can be a gardener, And I think that is like, that's one of my main jealousies of China is that like they can tell someone you're going to be a gardener and that person will do it. They can't just, go off to New Zealand or whatever. But it's.
You're real moderate.
I am a moderate. I am a center of the road kind of guy. But I think that we're sort of skidding to a halt a little bit with a lot of the AI stuff. There was that paper that Apple did, and I feel like there's going to be
good paper.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
It was interesting.
A lot of people mad at that paper.
That was the one about the tower game, right?
Yes.
I found it, look, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I found that to be a very compelling argument.
Very readable.
Yeah, very readable.
Yes, which is
important for me.
Yes.
It's like, well, I agree with this paper because it's readable.
You want to talk about gnomic statements. A lot of the AI shit
I know.
is so like inscrutable. I don't know. I just think that like a lot of I've been able to make really good AI images of certain senators from Pennsylvania. But beyond that, like I just am not seeing it being deployed at scale. And there's this over-promising, I think, of these immediate returns from it. Even the long-term returns, I think, are over-promised because I think a lot of the people who are going to lose their jobs won't be getting anything. That I think it's just going to lead to some problems in the next few years.
Well, it's interesting because like I think, again, you can't get inside these companies, so I don't know how they really talk about this or what they see or what data they see, right? But we know from other social media companies that everything is kind of like, everything is driven by like power users, right? I think about that, like, back when Twitter was public and they put out those numbers and it would be like all Twitter activity is thanks to this like narrow band of like insane power users and everyone else is sort of like dabbles. But there's these, there's this like thick top band that kind of powers the entire system. And I think about that with like something like ChatGPT, right? Which is like, clearly they've realized that, I don't know how to say it, like monetizing whatever intimate, people using this as like.
I masturbate while reading it says it's biting me in the neck because it's a vampire. Yes.
No, but obviously they found that, I don't know if those people are paying $200 a month or $20 a month, but like maybe they are.
They're paying $200.
And I would not be, and clearly they're going to feed into that. But I think there is this sort of like, okay, is it going to be this, are we going to like monetize these sort of like replacement intimate connections? Right? That's going to be part of the business plan. Clearly it is, right? I mean, they acknowledge it. Or is it going to be, Altman has said, I see AI replacing whole organizations, right? It's not truck drivers, but like entire white collar companies, for lack of a better word, whatever that means. Or is it going to be enterprise a la Excel deployed, to businesses, which you could see, a company like Microsoft really kind of working on stuff like that in the hospital and healthcare sector specifically. So it's like, I don't know. I think about that, about how they're going to find profit there.
I think it's tricky. I think you're right. It's interesting thinking back to the idea of Twitter power users, because a Twitter power user,
of which we are 3, by the way.
That's right. A Twitter power user did not massively increase Twitter's electricity bill. Right? This is a really key difference.
Totally.
Whereas a ChatGPT power user really costs them a lot more. And I think actually, to your point,
that's
coming up with a pricing model has been a non-trivial exercise because of this phenomenon. Where it's like people who really use. So I've like played around with some like vibe coding, as they've called it. I said one of my New Year's goals for 2025 was to build an app, which I did. All with Claude or ChatGPT or Cursor or whatever. But like, I don't want to ever run out of tokens to use. That'd be really annoying. And because I'm, in the groove, it's like, do this, do that, do that, do that. And the moment it's constrained, then I start having to think, it's like, do I want to give it this instruction or not? And I do think that there is some sort of monetizing usage is turning out to be a bit of a untrivial problem, in part because these users really cost them a lot of money, which was not the case in the era of either social media or to your beloved business-to-business SaaS. It was not the same degree.
But even if you look at like Meta's earnings or whatever, they say, it's like all of their profit is coming from like early tech era product, basically. And none of it, nothing is coming from AI.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
They're still just running on legacy.
When you get back to like how much is riding on this, facts such as that are not particularly comforting, are they?
No.
Well,
I know you got to go soon. We're keeping you long, but I do want to ask you about a little bit, just quickly before we go, because it is tied into all this AI stuff. You've been talking about our like return to orality.
Oh yeah.
And oral culture.
Yeah.
I'm curious how AI and LLMs kind of fit in with this.
The thing, so this is like, if I started writing about this a long time ago. Have either of you read Walter Ong? He's my favorite.
Father Ong. But not the
Jesuit
full
priest.
book.
He's so good. Anyway, but this idea that, which interests me, is that so much of everything is just this back and forth conversation, right? That the idea of someone sitting alone reading a book is one form, or maybe reading a newspaper is one source of becoming informed, and it leads to a certain train of thought, and that it's very different in a sort of environment in which everything is just constant back and forth, in which it's totally bidirectional. I think this is a really profound shift. I think this is a shift that precedes AI, but will probably be accelerated by AI, in part because the chatbot seemed to be embedded in everything. I mean, there will be a point where you're just, you're chatting with. Everything will have a chatbot in it, right? Or they're going to try to jam a chatbot everywhere. And I feel like they're jamming chatbots everywhere. You like accidentally hit the wrong button on any app and suddenly you're inside a chatbot.
It's like how they used to make you download an app for every single thing.
Yeah. And so we're just constantly chatting. You're going to get to a point where you're chatting with TV characters and they're going to chat back with you in a personalized way, right? And I think that is going to rewire our brain in profound ways, that there is no just sort of contemplative consumption of text, that everything is discourse, that everything is back and forth, that everything is one-upmanship, that everything is this slight competition, exaggeration, repetition, and so forth.
Lacan called it the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. It's the blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And that is the world we are headed to. And I think many things that we observe in politics and everyday life make a lot of sense when understood by this idea that we've gone from reading to chatting as the dominant mode of information.
It's interesting because LLMs I think also, we've never, because I know that Ong is talking about,
That's
like
right.
Pre-literate societies.
That's right. Homeric societies, yeah.
But we've never, the thing that I think we're confronted with LLMs is that we've never had to distinguish language from thought.
Yes.
Because thought is the only thing that could produce language was thought.
Yeah.
And yet now you have this machine, and it's why I think we imbue so much subjectivity into it, is because there's we kind of can't conceive of language without thought.
We've also never had to conceive of something like good grammar is not being evidence of education.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you're presented with a piece of text and the grammar is excellent, there's not a single typo, spelling mistake, whatever, you're like, oh, this is this is the product of some sort of learned individual, right?
Yeah.
And now that's gone.
Right.
That's like a pretty weird.
I think there's a
right.
host of heuristics that we'll basically have to abandon because of that.
That's right. Or just I think to your image generation, I'm sure you produced beautiful pieces of
Pornograph.
art.
Oh my God, man. I'll show you after we're done.
But yeah, I used to this promise that we couldn't have good art without craft, right?
Yeah.
I think is and I suspect it's a false promise, but that seems to be the promise of AI, that we can have something resembling good art without having to learn the craft of how do you mix paints, or how do you tune a guitar, or how do you select guitar strings, or whatever. Maybe that can all just be abstracted away. That is sort of what I perceive them to be selling.
But it's interesting. I think that, this is so off topic. I know we got to go, but I suspect that many will eventually learn that art has an ineffable quality.
Correct.
That is very hard to assign a metric to. That you might see a painting that is on one level aesthetically beautiful.
Yes.
But you will feel absolutely nothing looking at it. It's the
And
same
so
way.
as far as I know, no piece of art or music that has been AI produced has resonated with anyone in that real sense, right? Not as far as I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the question for...
There's impressive poems out there, but do they feel? No, I don't think so.
Exactly.
I think it'll be, I don't mean this even from an efficiency standpoint when we're talking about something like art, right? Although I also believe this from an efficiency standpoint when we're talking about just labor. But I think that, people who are able to learn and absorb these tools and then use them in really unique and distinct ways, as opposed to the tools just creating automatically, are going to be at the front of the pack, as it were.
I'm always experimenting. Right. Yeah.
We're
trying
always
things.
in the
Always
arena
trying
doing things.
In the arena, trying things.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for
Thanks
joining
for
us.
having me. This was a blast. I'm so thrilled that we made this happen.
You can find his podcast on the internet, Odd Lots, and you can find Bloomberg at Bloomberg.com, I'm assuming.
That's right.
Yeah, there it is.
That's right.
Anyways, thank you, Joe.
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you,
That was a
Joe.
lot of fun.
Why can't I say? It's something about saying odd lots that I think just jumbles my language.
What is an odd lot?
An odd lot is so typically assets are sold. You might buy a round lot, which is maybe 100 of some bond or something
I
like
see.
that. But let's say you wind up with 97 or 43 of some IBM bond or something like that. That might get called an odd lot. So things that don't quite fit into a typical block of trading.
Like a clear space.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it.
did you learn, Bryce?
Any of these, we ever talk to these kind of people? Even you, like, you're interested in economy. What should I put my money into? Like, what's going to be the next AMC? What's going to be the next Bed Bath & Beyond? What's going to be the next GameStop? I want to go.
Have you heard of Cluely?
I have heard of Cluely. I have, and I'm sorry. That boy is getting torn up right now.
No, it's not.
I feel like they're getting passed around between some of those VC types. You know what I'm saying? Like a peace pipe.
I don't like everything that I see coming out of, let's say, VC culture is increasingly bad.
But I don't understand what the deal is with VC. So if I have a VC, I just give you money, and then everyone thinks I'm smart if you do well.
Yeah.
Yes.
What the fuck?
What do you mean?
Isn't it you that's smart and I just gave you money? Because most of the times I give people money that didn't do well.
You couldn't do your thing without the money.
So they're like the executive producer of like Bumble?
Mm-hmm. But Bumble couldn't do its thing without the executive producer.
I know, but how come the executive producer gets to act like they came up with Bumble?
Because we live in a capitalist society, and this is how investment works.
This is the thing, the anarchy of the market. It drives me crazy. I'm trying to rationally plan for a 2-month break during November, right? And 2 months in November. And I can't do that because of an anarchic market is preventing me from doing the things that I really want to do.
I know.
There could be an economic recession by then.
Don't say that.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. You know what? And I'll say this, and I'll never say it again. Inflation, I'm just going to say, never raised our prices.
No, we're the Costco hot dog of podcasts.
Never,
The Arizona iced tea.
And I'm not complaining, But
You're just pointing it out.
I'm just pointing it out
Yeah.
that after transitory inflation, never once we stood atop a crop. We stood athwart inflation, yelling, "It's okay,
We got this.
$5."
You know what? Like many a company across this grand USA, we're absorbing it.
We're absorbing it.
We're not passing it down.
The Franzak shock.
Here we go.
That's what we call it. The Franzak shock.
With that, I'm Liz.
My name is Brace.
I'm producer Young Chomsky.
And this has been TrueAnon. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.